I've competed at the highest level of Warzone, but I would say that solos is without a doubt the most challenging mode in the game. And honestly, in the new version of Warzone, it's probably harder than ever before. In solos, there's no one to buy you back, there's no teammates to make up for any mistakes you made. And most importantly, everybody is playing for themselves, and they're doing so in formats that you might find traditionally frustrating, like camping in buildings, setting up claymores, using things like cluster mines. Things that traditional players in duos, trios, and quads might find frustrating elements of the game are just simply ways to survive in solos that almost feel necessary. So today I wanted to show you guys how to master solos, because this play is so drastically different to anything else you'll experience in Warzone, and I honestly think the best strategies in this mode are the most selfish strategies, and the ones that you would get flamed on the internet for in any other format of COD. Because make no mistake, in solos, you have to be a rat, or you're going to lose. In the background, we've got a super nice 17 or 18 kill win in solos that I managed to bag earlier today, and if you enjoyed this video, please do drop a like, make sure to subscribe as well as we're on the road to 200k, and please support the channel in any way you can. So let's dive into solos, because in all versions of Warzone, it's inherently been a challenging mode, but in this version of Warzone particularly, I think it's more difficult than ever. You have much shorter rounds of 20 minutes combined with a much more dense map that makes it harder to find opponents and makes them less easy to see. So with all of these difficulties in mind, let's talk about the things that you can do to improve your solos game. The first thing you need to do in solos is delete this playstyle from your brain, because I've seen so many players doing this early on in the early days of Urzikstan, and it's definitely something that's getting people killed. I have seen a lot of players taking rooftops or the tops of buildings or areas that they believe to be enclosed and not recognizing or realizing that they're actually very prone to being flanked. Urzikstan is a new map, and you're not going to know the layout to absolutely everything this early on, and neither do I. I absolutely don't know these things at all. But there are a number of rooftops in this game and a number of buildings in this game that have 3, 4, 5 different ways to get on the top of the roof, and people don't seem to realize that. So whenever you're taking a power position in Urzikstan, whether that's a rooftop or a building that you think is a strong position in the circle, I would really recommend actually just looking around, finding ladders, finding zip lines, and identifying potential threats where people can come from. And be aware that the wider the position you're taking, the easier it is to attack you without you hearing anything. I've had so many instances where I've landed on the opposite side of a rooftop to an opponent who thinks they're entirely safe, and then finds themselves surprised that they've been shot in the back, because they didn't realize that I was attacking them. A false sense of security is the number one thing that's going to get you killed in a solos game, when you think you have all of the cards in your hand, but in the reality, you don't. So have a look around for those zips, those ladder hatches, those jump up points, and try and lock yourself into more enclosed spaces. Like I say, solos is not a game that you win by being this ultimate Giga Chad on the map. It's a game that you win by playing intelligently and using advantages in the map to your advantage. So if that means finding a rooftop that only has one ladder or one stairwell, or maybe only 1 or 2 things that you can easily defend, then that is a far better option than putting yourself in random positions and not being sure what you can defend effectively. I feel like I say this all the time in solos, but this next major point is something I don't see enough players doing, and that is to expect a third party at all times. And this applies both in terms of starting a gunfight and also in terms of finishing a gunfight. If you're starting a gunfight, you need to be thinking about how quickly you can finish that passage of gameplay, because attractive noise from gunshots and gun sounds is like lighting a match in a room full of moths. These guys will just fly at you. The second people hear the faintest amount of gunfire in Warzone and solos, they think they can get a piece of the pie or get some free loot or get an easy kill. So the longer that gunfight drags out, the more likely you can expect a third party. But also in terms of ending a gunfight, the number of people I see who just go and loot a body instantly and end up staring at the floor at all these various different items and end up being shot because of it is exceptionally high in this game. There are visually distinctive options in Warzone now that will tell you if something's a legendary item. You can tell if there's a vest or a self-revive. And if you don't need to loot somebody and they don't have things that are worth you looting, then don't loot them. Because much like people sitting on bodies and waiting for them in DayZ, Warzone honestly is no different. In solos, if somebody sees you looting somebody, you're as good as gone. And you run the risk of getting tunnel vision on something you've just completed, rather than protecting yourself. I see lots of players standing out in the open looking at loot because they feel like they've dealt with the problem and that they're safe. Whereas for me, the first instinct is to move to cover and get to somewhere that's more protected. Or more importantly, create distance from where I've just made noise, because if I'm hanging around in the same area where I've just had a really prolonged gunfight, then chances are there are still people closing in on that location, hoping to get a piece of the action. The only time this doesn't apply is when I'm holding an obvious power position. And as an extension of this point and talking about being third-partied, assume in Urzikstan that distance is some sort of lie and fabrication. Because I'm seeing a lot of players feeling as though they're safe because there's lots of buildings around them, or they seem to be in a really built-up area that makes them less likely to be spotted, when in reality it's the opposite of that. When you're in these built-up locations in Urzikstan, like the major cities, or some of the old town areas or low town areas, the reality is that there's more likelihood that there are more people around you than you realize, because they're just hiding in more places. Whereas if you're somewhere in an open space like in Hadeek Farms, yes, you're more exposed and more vulnerable, but you have a better understanding of what could potentially be next to you. So in Urzikstan, always assume that somebody is nearby, always expect a third party to come after you, and be prepared to move and adjust your gameplay accordingly. Because the ones who aren't prepared for this, which I see time and time again in the solos that I've played, are the ones that get caught with their trousers down. Whereas the ones who are looking around and staying active and scanning their area are the ones who put up the better fights. The next big point for me in this version of solos is I'm seeing a lot of players with really bad trigger discipline in Warzone. And what I mean by that is they decide to jump into an engagement or start shooting at an opponent when they've got the drop on them from a visual or audio advantage. If you happen to spot somebody in a game of solos, or you happen to audibly hear their position, then you already have the advantage in that scenario. But the only way you can capitalize and convert that advantage is by actually gaining a high ground in the gunfight itself. I've seen a lot of players see me in an open field or see me somewhere where they think they're going to get a nice easy kill, they open fire, I do a couple of slide cancels, and suddenly the gunfight is reset. In solos, you want to minimize the opportunities for your opponent to reset a gunfight, get fully plated, and get back into the action. So only ever fire your gun when it's necessary and when you're guaranteed to get an advantage. Because again, much like the third partying problem, the shorter the engagement, the better it is. Unless you're confident you can get that kill or you can get that down, then generally speaking, don't bother. Because if you fire on an opponent and they zigzag away and they've got plates, they know where you are and you probably won't know where they are after that gunfight has failed. And more importantly, everybody in your surrounding area now also knows where you are. So that extra layer of awareness, thinking about actually being able to get the advantage in a gunfight, and more importantly, just being aware that you're always being watched and always being audibly listened out for, is something to really pay attention to. This next point sounds really obvious, but please do bear with me, and that is getting central in the circle early. We're talking about a new era of Warzone here, where the round timer is roughly 20 minutes, and most solo players tend to lack the confidence to move early into a circle, because they feel safer in buildings and safer in their surroundings. And that's a valid way to go about the game, and I'm definitely not saying that that's something they shouldn't do. But the reality is, with faster circles and a shorter game timer, people are being forced out of buildings faster than ever before. And when you have an abundance of players who don't move until they're forced or necessarily have to move, and you combine that with the fact that these circles move quicker and more frequently, it means that the vast majority of the player base are people on the edge of the circle. It's people who are transitioning, and people who are transitioning are always the ones who are most likely and prone to being caught out in the open and becoming an easy kill. And you can avoid this trouble and carnage simply by being deeper into the circle earlier. You don't need every kill streak in the world. It is nice to have a self-revive, but it isn't necessary. Having these things are bonuses, but having powerful positioning and not dying in the first place, that's the real kicker. I've got to drop this last point because it's a point that I think is 100% valid. Now, I'm a whingy streamer. I know that, I'm self-aware. I complain when people sit in corners, I complain when people use cluster mines, I complain when I hear Claymore, and I complain when I see people ratting in buildings. And I do that because I'm a Gigasweat. But as a resident Gigasweat, I also know that in solos, that's how you have to play. And that's the honest to God truth. There is no shame in sitting in a building in solos for 20 minutes straight if it wins you the game, because that's what solos is. It is Warzone effectively in its purest form, with no judgment and no sentiment. And that is how you should play it. People like myself, other content creators and streamers, and other sweats generally might call it being a rat, but the reality is, ratting is victory in solos. Use those cluster mines, pop down some claymores, put your building into a Rainbow Six Siege expedition if you need to. Because I can tell you, being prideful is not going to win you a damn thing in Warzone, but somebody running over a cluster mine for the 6th time that you've decided to deploy is definitely something that's going to win you a game. The only flip side and caveat to this rule of playing like somebody who is preparing for the end of the world is to just be a little bit self-aware of the things that you're using attracting attention. A cluster mine beeps, it gives away your position. A mosquito drone that is patrolling the sky around your head gives away the fact that you fired it off in the first place. And some of these items do have audible or visual cues that will make you more obvious, and if somebody knows how to counter them effectively, like myself, they probably will capitalize on that. That's about it for this solos videos today, and I really hope you enjoyed the gameplay and appreciated everything that I had to say in this video. If you did, please do drop a like, share it to your mates if you think it was interesting and helpful, and subscribe as well. These deep dives basically make up our channel, and we're on the road to 200k. I really appreciate all of your folks in recent live streams and videos, and we've been having a ball of a time for it. It means a lot to me, so thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.